Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us today, again, whether that be California, Florida, Idaho, Wisconsin, we are so glad that you're here. And so, today we're going to move through some really, probably one of my favorite stories in Genesis. You will notice my voice, my throat. I've got allergies, and it just is what it is. So bear with me today. I'm going to do my very best, and I think you're going to enjoy what we're going to go through. It is, again, so beautiful, so heavy, so rich. One of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. So, we'll just work through it together as we normally do. So, a reminder again, Genesis is not a history book. Right? Genesis, when you take time to understand the audience, the author's intent, the actual author, the original language, when you look at who actually wrote it, these Jewish people, understand who they were, what they believed, it becomes so rich. And so here at Ethos, we take so much time, so much energy to try to fully understand this text before we try to add any kind of application for today. And so this story, again, so rich, so beautiful, but we remember Torah was not written as a history book. It was written because it was a response to them being in Babylonian captivity, right? 587 BC. And so we always go back to that. Right from the get-go, we want to remind viewers, especially if you've just joined us, they are writing this. They're compiling all of the stories because they want to ensure that the stories, the rituals, their understanding of their God, monotheism versus polytheism, they want to hold on to those things for the next generations. And so how do you do it? How do you keep the recipes? How do you keep the stories? Yes, you continue retelling them, but you compile them. Right? You take the cookbook and you begin putting it to paper, right? And then you make it into a book. And this is essentially what Torah really is. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It's a recipe for how to keep Judaism kosher, right? And so every time they read their stories, anytime they read Torah, they see themselves in it. And so it is literally Israel miniaturized through every telling. So today we're going to delve in. We're going to go Genesis chapter 32, 25 through 33. We're going to finish off chapter 32. And yes, we're getting to the wrestling, right? We're going to get to it. And this, again, is one of the most quoted stories of the Jacob saga, right? So remember, Jacob and Esau, the two brothers. Right? The two brothers, Jacob, of course, right before he becomes Israel. Jacob is the quiet, thoughtful one, the settled one. He studies Torah, understands the promise. Esau does not, right? The idea here is he is despised. He despises the promise, doesn't understand the promise, gives away the promise. And so really Esau and Jacob are these two understandings of the higher self and the lower self of Israel. And so let's delve in here with Jacob and Esau. So here we go, chapter 32, verses 25 through 33. So let's read. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he could not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip became dislocated as he wrestled with him. And he, the angel, said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he, Jacob, said, "I will not let you go unless you have blessed me." Right? So he said to him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have commanding power with an angel of God and with men, and you have prevailed." And Jacob asked and said, "Now tell me your name." And he said, "Why is it that you ask for my name?" And he blessed him there. And Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, "I saw an angel face to face, and my soul was saved." And the sun rose for him when he passed Penuel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore, the children of Israel may not eat the displaced tendon with which on the socket of the hip until this day. For he touched the socket of Jacob's hip and the hip sinew. So many, just from the get-go, there are many stories in all different ancient cultures where the main protagonist will wrestle with the gods or the angels, or some kind of miraculous being. This kind of story would not have been a surprise to this ancient culture. So understand that first. This to us today seems kind of like like the wrestled with God, wrestled with an angel. For that time period, this would have been very normal. Would not have been something that you would have been like, whoa, I never saw that coming. Well, they did see that coming, right? This was kind of a norm with these kind of heroic, epic stories. So let's read. Notice this. And Jacob was left alone. He was left alone. Rashi points this out, and I love this quote. Jacob, like all other messianic archetypes, must meet the divine in solitude before bringing their people to freedom. So think about this. Abraham, Isaac, Moses, Elijah, Elisha, Daniel. Jesus will move through this time of solitude in the same way from everything, right, in order to experience the divine. And so Jacob is just kind of partaking in what all of these messianic archetypes, these individuals will do. And so Jesus does the very same thing. Think about Jesus for a moment, right? I often like to go back to Jesus, very, very central to this new understanding of Torah, right? Jesus, think about this, like Moses and the Israelites, right? He's going to wander the land in solitude, right? Not 40 years like Israel and Moses, but 40 days. You can see all the connections, right? He's going to do this in order to experience the divine, right? And so Moses, he experiences God there at the burning bush. Jacob, right? He's going to struggle with an angel, right? Or we'll get into it. What was he really struggling with? We'll get to it soon. Jesus is going to face the great tempter himself, right? So all these different things. One of my favorite writers connects this idea of solitude. And he says two things about solitude in these two different quotes. And I just want to read them for a moment and kind of sit with it because they're so beautiful. Jacob was left alone, right? The idea here, Jacob steps away by himself, much like Jesus. And so watch this, this quote about Jesus doing the very same thing that Jacob and his ancestors do, these other messianic archetype leaders. Jesus, Richard says here, Foster in Streams of Living Water, he says, Jesus, who retreated often to rugged wilderness, who lived and worked praying, who heard and did only what the Father said and did, shows forth the contemplative tradition in its fullness and utter beauty. So what he's saying here is Jesus, this is not something new. Jesus is not starting a new trend. This is something deeply Jewish. When you wanted to consider the divine in a deeper way, when you wanted to consider your journey, you didn't do it with the crowds around, right? You didn't do it as part of the madding crowd, right? What you did is you stepped away into a place of solitude. Because like this next quote says, you're not going to find a connection, a deep connection, an answer in the middle of the crowd usually. Right? Especially when we're talking divine matters. There's something beautiful that happens in solitude. So check out this next quote, one of my favorites by Foster. He says, in contemporary society, our adversary, the devil, right, majors in three things: noise, hurry, and crowds. If he can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, I love that, muchness and manyness, he will rest satisfied, right? If we get super caught up in all the things going on, we might miss out on a deeper experience because we are really caught up in muchness, really caught up in manyness. If you look at people's schedules today, they're so busy, But ask them some details about what they're doing, and you'll find it's really a lot of like nonsense for many people. We fill up our days with stuff, but when we ask about the importance of that stuff, the texture of it, oftentimes people will admit, yeah, I guess I didn't need to be on Facebook for 2 hours. I didn't need to be playing this certain game or whatever it is. We fill our time up with a lot of stuff. And Foster says here, it's only when we step into solitude that we can really deeply hear the divine voice. One of my friends, Matthew, he walked the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail is no joke. I even had this idea when I was younger in college. I thought, I'm going to do this. Then, of course, I read Into the Woods and some other books, and I thought, this might be a little tough. I did little segments of it, but not the whole thing. Matthew did the whole thing. A trail over 2,180 plus miles. He did it. It goes from the eastern states down to our southern states. So they're at the bottom of Georgia. It's tough. And so Matthew, the thing about Matthew was he didn't want to just do it for a hike. He wasn't looking to lose weight, any of that. Matthew, he wanted to spend time alone. He said, I have some really big decisions. I have some stuff in my past. He said, I want to spend some time in solitude. And so Matthew spent all this time on the trail, met tons of people, journaled, did lose a lot of weight, went through a bunch of different boots, went through some really tough moments, some really beautiful moments. And at the end, here's a quote from Matthew that I find so beautiful and compelling in regard to this moment with Jacob, right? He steps away. After walking the trail, I not only overcame big parts of ego and where it led, I wrestled with my past demons and I won. So good. This is exactly what Moses does. This is what Daniel does, right? He's there in the lion's den. Elisha, Elijah, Jacob, they're all doing this. They're stepping away in silence. They're looking over the past of what their nations have been through, their own journeys, and they're choosing to fight their past in order to live a better future. It's a really beautiful idea. But here's the big but. This kind of journey, it always comes with a cost, right? This kind of journey is not an easy one. And so there's going to be some wrestling, right? He doesn't just step alone and be like, hey, rainbow, there's my promise or whatever. There's going to be some difficulties. And so there's going to be some wrestling. Notice this next part. Jacob was left alone and a man shows up, right? There have been countless commentaries, countless people attempting to say who they think this man was, right? Or maybe not a man at all. There is a lot of speculation on what the man was. If you read the Jewish rabbis, the people who actually worked on this, wrote this, partook in the tradition of interpreting this, what you'll find is there are 4 different ideas for who this man or angel was. And so the 4 main ones are these. 1, it was the guardian angel of Esau. This is one that you'll find with Rashi. You'll find with some other medieval rabbis. You'll find this even in some modern ones, but not many modern. More like more ancient, right? You'll find the angel Michael. That gets brought up a lot, especially in many traditions today. The angel Michael, which many people will often associate. Oh, that must be Jesus. Whatever. That one is more modern. You have the divine God, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh, right? You have that idea that he actually is wrestling with God. And then the 4th one is it's more of a metaphorical idea that Jacob he's fighting, much like Matthew does. He's looking at the past sins of his people, the past mistakes, failures, brokenness. He's wrestling with those things and trying to figure out how to better understand the future, the present, where they're going. And so for me, I tend to side on the last 2, 3rd and 4th. I side with these 2 because honestly, most of the rabbinical teachings, most of the rabbis I respect most, they kind of lean more toward number 3 and 4. Even though Rashi, I love Rashi's commentated, but I feel like 3 and 4, the majority of the others side there. And so, what do these mean? Let's go. Let's talk about that. God. If it was number 3, God, did Jacob literally fight hand to hand with God? Does God have hands? Does God look like me? It could get a little weird, right? Probably not, right? The Jewish understanding of God, first and foremost, once you put God into a form, it becomes an idol. And so again, that probably wouldn't add up if it was a literal picture. Secondly, they saw the divine as being so beyond us, so big, that if the divine were to even look at you, that would mean you were dead, right? That'd be huge, right? You would be dead just looking in your direction. This is why Moses. The idea of Moses, when he has this experience with God, the idea here is that Moses, he says, I saw where God was. He had to turn his head and look the other way because he couldn't actually look at God's face. And so probably not a literal action where God literally sees him, right, touches him. So we go a little bit deeper here. This could be, again, the interpretation is Jacob is wrestling with the divine in a deeper symbolic way. Jacob, here's one commentator, Jacob wrestles with Yahweh in that he calls out, begs, wrestles with Yahweh's will, and chooses to hold firm to the promise that Israel will find shalom. So good, right? This one's heavy. Have you ever had one of those moments, I wonder? You agonize over a decision, right? Maybe you've experienced deep pain, loss. You're calling out for release, guidance, a sign, right? The lesson of Jacob is that rather than giving up on the prayer, giving up hope, right? He holds on even stronger to the idea, the belief that hope is going to find a way, that life is going to find a way. I think that's so beautiful. This could be, of course, yes, it's God, but it's not a literal physical experience here. It is a more of a speaking to, praying to. So that's the idea there of how to understand the concept of God here. The other one, the past sins of the people. This one is fascinating, especially when I consider Jesus, right? And him in the wilderness. So think about this for a moment. When Jesus is in the wilderness, right? And he's going through these temptations, he's going through the journey, he faces 3 different temptations which have like grossly been misinterpreted. They've been grossly misunderstood. When you think about the 3, though, it begins to get really heavy. It begins to get really beautiful. Jesus wrestles with the divine throughout these. Yes, he also experiences a wrestling with something bigger. One might even call it like Satan or whatever, but this is a really interesting wrestling moment. And so look at this first one. The appetite for power, hunger, for more. This is an interesting one here. So look at this. How many of us just want more, right? More land, more power, right? More is actually a really terrible burden. It's a temptation. And often more is going to leave us really empty, right? More often leaves us in a place of wanting, right? If I could only have this, if I could only have that. And many of us who we finally get that thing, we often find, well, now I need more, right? Those shoes never really satisfy, do they? Yeah, the heart's built so full. There's so much empty there to fill. It'll never be filled with shoes, right? The bigger idea here is that Jesus overcomes this idea of more, right? It's what empires often want, right? Putin wants more land, right? Zelensky, he wants more land, more resources. America wants more resources. Every large beastly empire fights and scrabbles to get more and more and more. And people suffer under that. And so Israel's saying, we're going to overcome the desire for more. The second one that Jesus faces here, that again is really a question for Israel, right? Expecting the spectacular. He says, Satan says, well, just throw yourself, right? Throw yourself off this temple, this rock, and God will catch you. You'll be okay. The angels will catch you. And the idea here is not literally to tempt God, right? Will God show up or not? The idea here is something bigger. Look at what one rabbi says of this text. This is a messianic rabbi, of course. He says the second temptation is less about tempting the divine, but demanding the miraculous happen in our time, our expectations, our plan. And so again, if you are Israel and you are under Roman captivity now, right? You're saying, I need it to happen now. My children are suffering, right? We are under terrible oppression under Rome. And the divine voice through Torah says, no, no, no. It's not always about you. It's not always going to happen when you need it to, right? It's like the person who prays for a clear day on a football field, whereas the farmer's praying for rain. Well, who will God answer? Well, the idea here that Israel's learning is we have to trust that things will work out, and it's not always going to fit within our schedules. Beautiful, right? When you understand that temptation, it actually means so much more because it's really for Israel, right? It's for the Jewish people. Number 3, worship. Satan says, worship me, right? Worship me. Look at me. Bow down to me. Bow your knee to me. The idea here, will you worship beastly empire, beastly values? And so worship, again, is placing value on something, right? And so Jesus chooses not to kneel to beastly empire, doesn't bend a knee, doesn't put his values with beastly empires, which again is Israel, right? Israel will not bend a knee to Babylon, will not bend a knee to Egypt, will not bend a knee to Greece, will not bend a knee to Rome. You get the idea here. It's about learning, what will you worship? Who will you worship? What do you find value in? And so to do this, right, we go back to Jacob. Jacob can only do this because he has stepped away for a time. He has found solitude. And again, every one of these patriarchal, these messianic archetypes, this is what they do. And so it says, Jacob wrestles with the man until the break of dawn. Jacob wrestles. Notice this. He wrestles all night long. Right? All night long. That would be exhausting. If this was literal, think about how crazy this would be, right? Not only are you fighting God, but you're doing it all night. Does that mean that God is weak? Right? If you're able to hold him off for an entire night, Jacob must be a pro wrestler, right? Look out, Hulk Hogan. No, that's not the idea here. Notice this. He wrestles with him throughout the night, right? Jacob's dark night of the soul is followed by a day-breaking newness of the spirit. That's the deeper idea here. And so this is a message again to Israel, right? It's Israel miniaturized. And so there's going to be new life in the morning, right? You can't stop the sun from breaking over the horizon. It's going to happen. It happens every single day. And though you try, though you push your ideas and you're demanding it not to rise, it's going to rise. It just does. And so hold firm to the promise. Don't let go. At some point, the sun will rise again. It just does, right? Hold firm. Hold on. Don't let go. That's the message to Israel right here in this moment. And so verse 27, and he, the angel, said, let me go, for dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you have blessed me. So again, Jacob, this is not about God being a weak wrestler, or Jacob being a strong wrestler, right? Or Jacob knowing some special toehold grip that he's holding God with. No, right? Jacob is not the masked marvel of wrestling. The idea here is Jacob chooses not to let go of the promise, right? He is going to hold on. He's going to hold on all throughout the night to this promise that his people are going to make it through. That, oh, it's beautiful, right? Holding on to hope, holding on to the idea that life is going to burst forth just around the corner. Just hold on a little bit longer. The sun is going to burst over that horizon. Just hold on a little longer. But notice this. Some of us, right, we've been through tough stuff. It has taken years for some of us to lose some of the pain, right? Often that pain is going to linger, right? Some of us have been through some trauma. Some of us, it's been self-inflicted, right? We experienced freedom, but man, it came at a cost, didn't it? You might have experienced something great, but it came at such a cost that you are left with a limp, right? We gained wisdom, but it cost so much, right? There was a cost for that. And so he said, what is your name after you've gone through the pain, after you've gone through the brokenness? What is your name? He said, Jacob says, Jacob. So again, before it was Jacob, before the wrestling match, before he holds on, before all this, he says, my name is Jacob, the scholar, right? The one that works hard, that appreciates Torah, that understands the promise. I'm Jacob. I understand Torah. That's the idea behind Jacob. But look what happens next. This to me is so good. So good. He says, the angel says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have commanding power with God and with men, and you have prevailed. Almost every single rabbinical interpretation here, it says this: Jacob embodies Torah. That's what this means. When Jacob's name moves from one that appreciates Torah to one that embodies Torah, something deep just happened. And many of you who understand the Jesus story, you're already making the connection, aren't you? Because he said this: I am the way, the truth, and the life. These three words, these three phrases were used synonymously with Torah. Torah is the way. Torah is the truth. Torah is the life. Jesus is mimicking Jacob. Beautiful. Jesus says, I embody Torah too. I embody it. And it's what Israel is called to do. Israel sees themselves in Jacob. Israel sees themselves in Jesus. It's not just enough to appreciate Torah. What we need to demand of ourselves, what we need to push ourselves to do, is to learn to embody it. It's one thing to understand all the interesting nuances, one thing to understand all the fascinating words and complex theories and all of that. But if you don't learn to embody it, then we miss the deeper blessing. And so Jacob's name is changed. Jacob goes from understanding to embodying. And that is the deeper understanding of the story. In that moment, when Jacob embodies Torah, Jacob is now ready to lead his people to freedom. Yeah, I know, it's so good. I've never heard it that way before until I took time to read these rabbinical understandings of it. This is how they read it. Jacob learns to go from appreciating Torah to embodying Torah. We're not finished yet. And so Jacob named that place Peniel. And he said, I saw an angel face to face, and my soul was saved. Peniel means literally the face of God, right? I saw the face of God. After the struggle, after the wrestling, we often see a deeper glimpse of the divine, don't we? We see a better understanding of self. We see a better understanding of the world around us. It only comes through struggle, right? So the place is, of course, called face of God. It totally makes sense. And then it continues. Jacob named the place Peniel and saw an angel face to face. And it said, the sun rose for him when he passed Penuel, and he was limping on his thigh. Again, he walks with a limp. He remembers because it's going to be with him forever, right? He remembers the past. And again, I know so many of you who have gone through some of these really painful moments. I, like you, we've gone through them. And it's taken time to trust people again, hasn't it? It's taken time to view certain things again, to hear certain songs again. We've had to do some heavy work, some heavy wrestling, and it has left us with a little bit of limp. It's a reminder of the journey of the overcoming that we've done, right? When Israel leaves captivity, they're battered. They're a bit broken, right? They're a bit muddied, but they leave nonetheless. They leave Egypt. They leave Babylon, right? They leave with a limp. But notice this in verse 33. Therefore, the children of Israel may not eat the displaced tendon, which is on the socket of the hip until this day. For he touched the socket of Jacob's hip in the hip sinew. Here's the idea behind this, right? Jews will do this often, just like most ancient cultures did, and they hold on to these rituals and traditions. And so, as a reminder of the story, when they're eating the cow or the lamb or whatever, they will purposely leave that tendon out, and they will remind themselves of this story. Life, wisdom comes at a cost. Sometimes it leaves us with a limp. So good. In everyday life, you have these rituals that remind you of these stories and of the deeper experiences of life. So good. When we've overcome, we often step away with a limp with the deeper wisdom. Folks, I had so much fun. I hope my voice wasn't too difficult for you to keep up with. I think this was so beautiful. Again, one of my favorite stories of Genesis. It's so beautiful. So, what do we do? How do we take it home? I thought about how do we learn from our past in regards to Jacob in the wrestling match. I have been through some things much like you, and I've heard so many of your stories as well. And I started to really think about what has been great for me in my own journey. And so here's some ideas that I've had that I wanted to share. Number one, I'm learning to, in these moments, reflect on my journey. I'm learning to reflect on my story, right? One of my good friends, he says, tell your story until you finally hear it for yourself, right? Tell your story until you finally hear it. And what I did when I would tell that story, what I found is, you know what? Sometimes I played a part in it, right? Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes that I didn't think about this person was going through this and this and this. No wonder their response was that. It may not have been okay still that happened, but I can at least learn from it. I can understand it. I can even develop some sympathy and maybe even some empathy, right? When I stop and reflect on it some, I learn that there's something far, far deeper to that story than meets the eye. Number two, I'm studying it. I will study it. I'll sift through the story. I'll sift through the experience. I will look for the gems, the moments where, there was a lesson there, and I didn't learn it then. I think it's time I learned it now, right? You study it. This is what Israel's doing with Torah. They're studying their story. Why shouldn't we do the same with ours? Number three, reframe it, right? What did I learn? And how can it help me improve now, right? So what did I learn from it? What can I do differently moving forward? Again, this is what Israel does over and over again. Reframe it. It was a loss then. Maybe now it's a win because you learned something. It was so terrible back then, but look where it got you. Look where you are now, right? Learn to reframe it. And then lastly, use it. Use the wisdom to make better decisions now. Use that wisdom to be more careful with the people you're surrounded with, to develop a different kind of community or seek one that works best for you now. Use the wisdom you gain from it. Don't just put it off and keep doing the same thing, same cycle. Use what you learned from the story. put it to use. Tell the story now. Share it with others. Find ways to build new community, new friendships, all of that. You can do that. And that's what Israel's really being called to do, to use that newer wisdom, to use that story that they've gotten. So good. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. I knew we were getting there. It just got me so excited to be able to share it. As always, please consider donating. ethos-church.org/donate. We are a tax-deductible donation organization, and we depend on those donations to continue doing what we do every single week, to be able to put that time and the energy, the recording, the editing, all of it. It does take time. And so we thank you so much for working with us, continuing to donate and being a part of this. If you want to continue to do live discussions with us, consider going to Ethos Living Rooms. It's always a joy to be able to talk to people live online. And then as always, hit that subscribe button, whether you're on Vimeo, YouTube, the podcast, any of those places, TonyWerfel.com, ethos-.com, wherever it is. We are so thankful you're joining us weekly. Again, whether it's Spotify, Google, wherever it is, we're so glad that you're joining us weekly and moving through such a fun, interesting, deep book. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to join you next week. Hopefully it'll be sooner than next year. Next week, and we're going to get into chapter 33. Take care, and we'll see you.